Welcome to the deep dive. We're incredibly glad you decided to spend some time with us today.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
So if you're listening to this, there's a very high chance that at some point in your life, you've frantically Googled a life hack.
Oh, absolutely. We all have.
Right. Maybe you were trying to figure out how to, I don't know, get a red wine stain out of a carpet.
Yeah.
Or how to salvage a pan you completely burnt.
The burnt pan is a classic.
It is. And when you're in that panic mode, you know how crucial it is to actually trust the voice on the other end giving you that advice. You need an authority. Well, today our mission is to unpack a single, absolutely fascinating Wikipedia article that we've been poring over.
It's such a good one, too.
It really is. It's all about an Australian broadcasting legend. Now, her public name was Martha Gardner, but she was actually born Kathleen Zoe Worrell.
And the goal for you today is to discover exactly how a former school teacher...
Someone with almost zero hands-on domestic experience, mind you.
Exactly. How she somehow became one of the most trusted voices in household advice for well over half a century.
It's an unbelievable story.
It really is an astonishing trajectory. And as we dig into these sources today, I want to establish right at the top that this isn't just, a standard, dry, historical biography.
No, not at all.
What we're really looking at here is a masterclass in reinvention. It is a profound look at the psychology of coping with grief. It's about the sheer power of active listening and, honestly, the rapid evolution of modern media throughout the 20th century.
Yeah, she lived through all those changes.
She did. And by the time we finish this discussion, I think you'll see how her life provides a rather brilliant blueprint for how we navigate our own modern careers, our imposter syndrome, and our personal challenges.
Okay, let's unpack this. I want to start right at the beginning because we really need to get a sense of who Kathleen actually was before she became this massive household name.
Right, the early years.
Yeah. So the source material tells us she was born Kathleen Norris in Camberwell. That's a suburb of Melbourne, Australia.
February 9, 1905.
Exactly. She was the second of 4 kids to John and Ellen Norris, and she received a very solid education at Milverton Girls Grammar School.
Which was a big deal at the time.
It was. And then she trained to become a teacher. In the 1920s, she was actually teaching at St. Duthas Girls' School. So her foundational professional experience wasn't in a kitchen.
Yeah.
It wasn't in a broadcasting studio. It was literally standing in front of a classroom of young women.
And that specific background in teaching is absolutely critical to understanding everything that follows.
How so?
Well, think about what the 1920s classroom dynamic was like. It was highly structured. It required immense discipline, and frankly, it required a certain performative authority.
Right, you couldn't just casually chat with the student.
Exactly. As a teacher, you have to know how to project your voice without a microphone. You have to know how to hold an audience's attention. And most importantly, how to read a room to adapt your delivery on the fly if you're losing them.
So she was getting all this practical experience.
Yeah, she was building a toolkit for public speaking and audience management without even realizing she was going to use it for media.
That makes total sense.
But the real catalyst for her life shift, the moment the track completely changes, happens on April 18th, 1929.
That is the day she married a journalist named David Thomas Worrell.
Yes.
And the article notes they settled down on this sprawling 7-acre property. It's orchard and bushland out in Donvale. It sounds incredibly idyllic, honestly.
It does.
And they eventually had 2 children. But the major pivot here isn't just the change of scenery. It's David's career, isn't it?
Exactly. Because shortly after they got married, David was appointed as the manager of Melbourne broadcasting station 3DB.
Which was huge.
Huge. But you have to contextualize what radio was in the 1930s. It wasn't the polished, highly formatted corporate machine we know today.
Right, it was kind of the Wild West.
It was the Wild West. It was rapidly expanding. It was highly experimental. And it was doubly intimate because it was bringing live voices directly into people's living rooms for the very first time.
So suddenly, Kathleen goes from being a school teacher in a very rigid, traditional environment
to being intimately adjacent to this chaotic, creative frontier of early media.
Which leads to my absolute favorite detail in this entire article. I was reading this and I actually laughed out loud.
The filling in part.
Yes, because she was the definition of an accidental broadcaster. During the 1930s, while her husband is managing the station, Kathleen just starts filling in for various 3DB presenters in this incredibly ad hoc way.
She just stepped up.
Yeah. She didn't have an agent. She didn't have a grand broadcasting ambition. She literally spent 2 years playing a character called the Queen on a radio program called The King and Queen of Nonsense.
The King and Queen of Nonsense. It's brilliant.
It says she leaned on her amateur theater experience. She played the piano. She was basically just making it up and having fun on live radio.
Which is such a revealing detail. If you look at the pattern here, she was not a trained broadcaster. There were no broadcasting schools the way we think of them today. But she brought those core competencies of commanding a classroom and translated them directly into radio entertainment.
She adapted.
Exactly. She wasn't rigid.
Nah.
When someone handed her a microphone and said, "We need you to be the queen of nonsense today," she didn't freeze. She just went with it.
But that adaptability is about to get put to the ultimate test, and the whole tone of her career changes. As we move into the 1940s, her role at the station starts to shift away from nonsense and comedy.
Right.
She finds herself filling in on the 3DB gardening show. And this is the exact moment she decides she needs a nom de plume. She adopts the name Martha Gardner.
It's such a perfect name.
It is. Now, her exact quote on why she chose that name is included in the source, and she simply said, "It sounded nice and homely."
Which is a phenomenal piece of personal branding. Executed decades before personal branding was even a formalized concept in media.
Oh, absolutely.
Think about the psychology of that name. Martha Gardner instantly evokes a sense of approachability, warmth, and grounded domestic competence.
You hear that name, and you just trust her.
Yes. When a listener hears that name, it signals exactly how they should feel. Safe, comforted, and in capable hands.
I completely see that. But as I was reading through the timeline of her life here, this is where things take a very sharp, heartbreaking turn.
Yeah, it's incredibly sad.
We have this idyllic image of Martha Gardner building this brand, but in 1942, Kathleen suffered an unimaginable personal loss.
She did.
Her 12-year-old daughter died as a result of a horse riding accident. I can't even begin to fathom that kind of devastation.
What's fascinating here is how Kathleen chose to process that trauma.
Right.
The psychology of grief is incredibly complex. For many people, a tragedy of that magnitude understandably results in a complete withdrawal from public life.
You just shut down.
Exactly. The world stops making sense, so you retreat from it. But Kathleen did the exact opposite. As a direct way of coping with the sudden death of her daughter in 1942, she actually pursued her broadcasting career far more actively. She threw herself into creating and hosting a new shopping and cooking advice show called Can I Help You?
Just the title of that show alone, Can I Help You? It really says everything about where her mindset was, doesn't it?
It really does.
She was actively reaching out.
She was. And this is why it matters so much to our understanding of her legacy, Can I Help You? Wasn't just a radio program to fill a time slot, it was a lifeline for her.
A way to survive it.
Yes. It became the very foundation of her reputation as this chatty, informal, incredibly comforting advice giver. If we think about how this applies to human behavior generally, and perhaps even to you listening to this right now, when you are faced with an immense, unfillable personal void, finding a structured way to serve and connect with others can be a profoundly powerful coping mechanism.
That's a really beautiful way to frame it.
She had all of this nurturing maternal energy that had just suffered a catastrophic blow, and instead of letting it consume her entirely, she channeled it outward into the airwaves to nurture her listeners instead.
Wow. I mean, to be fielding questions about baking scones and fixing hems while internally navigating the loss of a child, the sheer mental fortitude that requires is staggering.
It's hard to even imagine.
And that deep, genuine desire to connect is clearly what resonated with the audience, because it launched her into an entirely new stratosphere of fame.
Let's talk about 3AW.
Let's look at her reign at Station 3AW.
Uh-huh.
This began in July 1952, and it turned into a legendary 30-year stint.
30 years.
For 3 decades, she hosted an hour-long program called Martha Gardner Recommends every single weekday afternoon. Just the physical and creative stamina to do an hour-long daily show for 30 years is mind-blowing to me.
The stamina is undoubtedly impressive, but we also have to look at the massive historical and technological pivot that happened right in the middle of this era.
Oh, the 1967 laws.
Exactly. In 1967, talkback radio was officially made legal in Australia. Now, we really have to remember what the dynamic was like before 1967.
It was completely different.
Broadcasting was highly controlled. Listeners who had questions for Martha about their households or their gardens had to send those queries by mail.
Which takes days.
Or they had to phone them in to a switchboard operator off air, and then those physical written notes were handed to Martha in the studio.
So she had a massive buffer.
Right. She had time to process the questions, think about the answers, look things up if she needed to, and control the entire flow of the show.
But then the law changes.
After 1967, the laws changed, and suddenly, she was handling these questions live on the air.
Which completely removes the safety net. You're suddenly doing a high-wire act every single afternoon. And here's where it gets really interesting.
That is my favorite part.
Because of that removed safety net, we have to confront the grand irony of Martha Gardner. I was reading this in the article, and I actually had to reread it to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding.
I know exactly what you're going to say.
She openly admitted that she actually had very little hands-on experience with housework or cooking.
It's wild.
The most trusted domestic voice in the entire country, fielding live, unscripted calls from housewives across Australia, didn't actually know how to run a house. How on earth did she not get exposed as a fraud on live radio?
It is the ultimate paradox of her career. And it's what makes her story so incredibly compelling. How do you compensate for a massive gap in practical experience when you are doing live, unscripted, talkback radio?
You can't fake it live.
No, you can't. Well, this is where her sheer intellect and strategic thinking took over. She realized she needed a baseline of knowledge, so she did go out and complete a formal course at the Emily McPherson College of Domestic Economy.
Okay, so she got some academic backing.
She did. But a single course doesn't give you the answers to thousands of random, hyper-specific listener questions.
Right. How do I get motor oil out of a silk blouse isn't in the standard syllabus.
Exactly. Her real, undeniable superpowers were twofold. She was a voracious reader, and she possessed an absolutely extraordinary memory.
So she basically built a real-time mental search engine for household facts decades before the internet or Google even existed.
Precisely. She consumed information constantly and categorized it in her mind, but she paired that massive knowledge retention with genuine empathy.
The act of listening you mentioned earlier.
Yes. The sources specifically note that she showed immense respect for all her callers, particularly the younger listeners who were calling in feeling completely overwhelmed by their own households.
Which goes right back to her being a teacher.
It does. So I have to ask, what stands out to you about this? Because when I look at this scenario, I see a perfect historical counter-argument to modern imposter syndrome.
Oh, that's a great point.
So many of us feel like frauds in our workplaces because we don't have innate, perfect, hands-on expertise in every single aspect of our jobs.
We think we have to know everything on day one.
Right. We think if we don't know it all naturally, we don't belong in the room. Martha Gardner proves that you don't always need to be the innate expert.
You just have to be prepared.
If you commit to thorough research, if you leverage a great memory, and above all, if you treat your audience or your clients or your colleagues with immense respect, you can absolutely become a legitimate, highly trusted authority.
That is such an empowering way to look at it. You don't have to be perfectly experienced. You just have to be fiercely prepared and deeply kind.
Exactly.
And it certainly worked for her because her career longevity just defied all the odds. I mean, 30 years at 3AW would be a full career for anyone. But she didn't just retire after that.
No, she kept going.
In July 1982, she moved over to Station 3UZ. She also started crossing mediums. She was doing television segments on Channel 9's The Mike Walsh Show.
A huge show.
Massive. And the article mentions she was popping up as a regular guest on Australian Broadcasting Corporation radio programs as late as 1989.
She was in her 80s by then.
Yes. She even co-authored a book detailing the 60th anniversary history of 3DB with Australian entertainment icon Bert Newton back in 1987. She was absolutely everywhere.
Her adaptability across decades and mediums is truly remarkable. Think about the arc of that career. She navigated the shift from the rigid, highly scripted early days of radio,
Right.
then through the wild west of live, unpredictable talkback, and straight into national television broadcasts. She constantly evolved with the technology instead of fighting it.
And she didn't just leave a legacy of audio and video recordings. This is the part that I think really cements her in the culture. She left actual tangible products that people physically brought into their homes.
The physical legacy.
Yes. In 1985, she published a physical book, Martha Gardner's book, Everyone's Household Help. It prominently featured her image right there on the cover.
People wanted her in their homes.
They really did.
Yeah.
In the 1980s, she also did a TV commercial advertising Martha's stain removal kit. But the absolute crown jewel of her physical legacy, the thing that blew my mind reading this,
Yeah.
has to be the wool mix.
Ah, yes. The legendary wool mix. This is where the parasocial relationship becomes entirely tangible.
It's just wild. So the story goes that she used to give her radio listeners this DIY recipe to make at home to wash their woolens.
Right. A home remedy.
It was a very specific, simple mixture of soap flakes, methylated spirits, and eucalyptus oil.
Mm.
You can all smell that right now.
Oh, definitely. That sharp, clean eucalyptus scent.
It became so incredibly popular among her listeners that a company eventually started producing it commercially under the name Martha's Wool Mix.
They commercialized her recipe.
Yes. And get this, the exact same product, born from a radio show recipe, is still sold today in major Australian supermarkets like Woolworths and Coles under the brand name Softly.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is exceedingly rare for any media personality to transcend their medium so completely that they create a physical, staple product that outlives them for decades on supermarket shelves.
Usually a radio host just fades into history.
Exactly. It speaks volumes about the absolute, unquestioning trust she built with her audience. When you gave a listener advice that actually worked, like a mixture of eucalyptus and soap flakes that perfectly cleaned their favorite wool sweater without ruining it, they didn't just hear a voice on the radio anymore.
They felt like she was helping them directly.
They felt like Martha was right there in the laundry room with them. It transformed a one-way media broadcast into a deeply ingrained household habit.
It's the ultimate proof of impact. You aren't just an entertainer anymore. You are a fixture in their daily lives.
Absolutely.
But as we look at the final chapter of her life as laid out in the article, the tone of her story shifts again.
It does.
Let's look at her final years. Martha Gardner Kathleen Worrell died on February 12, 1991, in the Melbourne suburb of South Yarra.
And this brings us to a rather profound and deeply sobering reality about her life, especially when contrasted with the persona she portrayed.
So what does this all mean? When we look back at the entirety of this deep dive, Martha Gardner stands as this incredible testament to empathy, lifelong learning, and the undeniable power of reinvention.
A true pioneer.
She showed us that a school teacher can become a radio star, a grieving mother can become a national confidant, and a woman with very little practical domestic experience can become the ultimate undisputed household authority just by being willing to learn and listen.
She certainly represents all of those triumphs, and we should absolutely celebrate that resilience. But I want to leave you with one final, deeply provocative thought based on the last details of her biographical record.
Okay.
The source material notes a tragic final reality. By the time Kathleen died in 1991, she had outlived her husband, David. She had outlived her son, and as we discussed earlier, she had long outlived her daughter.
She was the last one left.
She passed away leaving an estate valued at over 2 million Australian dollars. But with absolutely no immediate family left to inherit it, she bequeathed that entire amassed fortune to the Little Sisters of the Poor in Northcote, which is a charity for the elderly poor.
That is just an incredibly heavy realization.
It forces us to ask a very difficult, lingering question. What does it truly mean that a woman whose entire public persona, whose chosen, comforting name, and whose lasting cultural legacy were built entirely on the idea of a bustling, perfectly managed, loudly joyful family home, ultimately spent her final years having outlived her entire immediate family?
The contrast is jarring.
It is. What does it mean that she left her hard-earned substantial fortune to a charity for the elderly poor because there was no one left in her own home to pass it on to? I think it forces us to think deeply about the quiet, often unseen separation between a comforting public persona that gives so much warmth to the world and a heartbreaking private reality that a person has to navigate entirely on their own. She spent a lifetime helping millions of people manage their homes, while her own home slowly emptied out.
That is a profoundly moving and frankly heartbreaking thought to end on. It really puts her immense generosity, both the energy she gave on the air for over 50 years and that staggering final act of charity, into an entirely new perspective. She gave everything she had to the public.
She really did.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive today. We hope you take these lessons of adaptability, empathy, and resilience with you. Until next time, keep asking questions and keep exploring.